The House Judiciary Committee hearing room was filled to capacity that Tuesday afternoon, every seat occupied by reporters, aides, and spectators who sensed that something significant was about to unfold. At the witness table sat Stephen Miller, former senior advisor to President Trump and principal architect of the administration's controversial immigration policies. His jaw was tense, and his eyes swept across the committee like a hawk assessing its surroundings. Opposite him, Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas adjusted her microphone, her expression calm though her eyes reflected sharp determination. No one anticipated that over the next 30 minutes, Miller would interrupt Crockett 6 times each instance, more forceful than the last only for her composed and precisely delivered 7th statement to silence him entirely, altering the tone of the entire proceeding. The exchange would soon go viral, drawing millions of views and igniting a nationwide discussion about respect, authority, and control within American politics. Before we unpack the details of this much-talked-about hearing, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any future coverage of key political moments. Drop a comment below letting us know where you're watching from. We appreciate all viewers across the nation who stay engaged in what's happening in Washington. To understand why this confrontation became so impactful, it's essential to know who these two individuals are and why their clash seemed inevitable the moment Miller sat down. At 38, Miller had built his career as a staunch advocate of hardline immigration measures. As Trump's senior advisor and chief speechwriter, he helped craft several of the administration's most divisive initiatives, including the family separation policy and the travel ban affecting predominantly Muslim nations. Known for his combative demeanor and refusal to concede ground, Miller was recognized in political circles for dominating debates through assertiveness and rapid-fire rhetoric. He had sparred with senators, journalists, and other officials, always maintaining his intense focus and steadfast composure. Facing him was Representative Jasmine Crockett, a freshman congresswoman from Texas, who had swiftly gained respect as one of the most incisive questioners in the House. At 42, she brought a blend of courtroom experience and legal precision to the chamber. A former civil rights attorney and public defender, Crockett was well-versed in handling confrontational witnesses and had long understood the effort required for her voice to be heard. Her district covered parts of Dallas and nearby suburbs regions directly affected by the immigration measures Miller helped design. The stakes of the hearing were immense. The committee was examining the long-term effects of Trump-era immigration practices, particularly the family separation policy that led to thousands of children being removed from their parents at the border. Recently released documents revealed that officials had been aware of the potential psychological harm yet implemented the policy regardless. Miller was summoned to testify about his involvement in shaping and enforcing these directives. For him, the hearing was about defending both his legacy and his continued belief in strict immigration control as a matter of national security. He arrived prepared, armed with statistics, notes, and his assertive debating style, viewing the hearing as another platform to reinforce his message of deterrence and enforcement. For Crockett, however, the issue was deeply personal. She had visited detention centers, met families affected by separations, and witnessed the emotional damage inflicted on children, some barely old enough to speak. As a black woman in Congress, she also understood the dynamics of power, how men like Miller often attempted to dominate discussions through interruption and disregard. She had encountered such attitudes throughout her career, from individuals who mistook loudness for authority and interruption for intellect. The atmosphere in the hearing room was thick with anticipation. Behind Miller sat his advisors and attorneys, all dressed in dark suits, their expressions tense. Behind Crockett were her staff and, in the gallery, immigration advocates, some wearing shirts displaying images of separated children. The cameras were rolling, and national news outlets had interrupted broadcasts to cover the hearing live. Committee Chair Jim Jordan called the session to order at precisely 2 p.m., already struggling to manage the charged audience. Members of both parties were ready Democrats prepared to scrutinize Miller's record, Republicans set to defend him and redirect blame to current border concerns. Yet, all present knew the true confrontation would occur between Miller and Crockett. For 20 minutes, Miller fielded questions from other members, using his practiced strategies, speaking quickly, pivoting to prepared points, and talking over opponents when challenged. Republicans offered friendly questions, letting him present himself as a misunderstood defender of national security, while Democrats sought to corner him on specific issues, only to find him evasive. When Jordan announced, "The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Crockett, for 5 minutes," the room quieted instantly. Crockett leaned forward, her tone composed and deliberate. "Mr. Miller, thank you for appearing today. I'd like to begin with a simple question. Do you acknowledge that the family separation policy caused documented psychological trauma to thousands of children?" Miller immediately responded in a rapid, defensive tone. "Congresswoman, what I acknowledge is that the policy focused on border security." "Mr. Miller," she began, but he continued talking over her. "The true trauma," he pressed, "comes from human traffickers exploiting children and previous administrations encouraging illegal crossings." Crockett raised her voice slightly but remained composed. "Mr. Miller, I'm asking a specific question regarding documented trauma." Miller interrupted again, dismissing her sources as biased and failing to consider the broader context. "Mr. Miller," she said firmly, "this is my time. I'd appreciate it if," but he spoke over her again, claiming his policies were attempts to fix long-standing border failures. Jordan lightly struck his gavel. "The witness will allow the member to ask her questions." Miller leaned back slightly, jaw tight, eyes fixed on Crockett. She calmly continued, flipping through papers. "Mr. Miller, I have here a memo from your own Department of Health and Human Services, stating that family separations would result in significant and long-term psychological harm to children. Do you dispute this?" Miller deflected again, claiming misrepresentation and pivoting to comparisons with the Obama administration. His interruptions grew louder and more forceful, prompting murmurs from the gallery. Several Democrats shook their heads, while even a few Republicans appeared uneasy. Crockett remained steady, jotting notes as he spoke. When he paused, she said evenly, "Mr. Miller, I understand you have talking points, but I'm asking about specific documents from your own administration." Miller raised his voice again, asserting, "My administration saved lives and stopped trafficking, something you seem to overlook." "Mr. Chairman," Crockett said calmly. Turning toward Jordan, "I'd appreciate if the witness allowed me to ask my questions." Jordan nodded and requested order. Miller's face flushed, his hands gripping the table. The tension in the room was palpable. Cameras clicked as reporters captured every word. Crockett maintained her focus. "Mr. Miller, I've been a civil rights attorney and a public defender. I've stood in courtrooms across this nation, and I have never—" "Your courtroom experience," Miller interrupted with condescension, "doesn't make you an expert on national security or border enforcement, Congresswoman." But this time, Crockett didn't respond. Instead, she leaned back and let him speak. For 30 more seconds, Miller continued his monologue about security, trafficking, and failed Democratic policies. When he finally stopped, expecting her to jump back in, she remained silent. The quiet stretched one beat, then two, until the stillness in the room was absolute. Then she spoke, her voice calm but carrying weight. "Mr. Miller, you've interrupted me 6 times. In doing so, you've shown this committee and the American people exactly who you are." Miller opened his mouth, but Crockett raised a single finger and he stopped. Men like you have been interrupting women like me our entire lives, she continued, her tone measured yet firm. You interrupt because you think your voice matters more. Because you equate loudness with legitimacy. Because deep down, you know that if you truly had to answer these questions and confront the documented harm caused under your policies, your narrative would collapse. The room was utterly silent. Miller's face paled as Crockett methodically spread documents before her. Let me tell you what these records actually show, Mr. Miller, she said evenly. This memo from your own deputy secretary states that children as young as 8 months were separated from their mothers. This report from Customs and Border Protection confirms there was no system in place to reunite families. And this email chain, which includes your name, shows you dismissing concerns about psychological harm because, quote, the deterrent effect outweighs other considerations. Those considerations, Mr. Miller, were children, infants, and toddlers who will carry that trauma for life. And you knew it. The gallery reacted emotionally as Jordan called for order. Crockett continued, unwavering. You can interrupt, dismiss, and talk over me all you want, but I'm still here. Those families are still broken. Those children are still suffering. And you? You're still responsible. She leaned forward and delivered her final statement with quiet force. You may have had the power to separate families, Mr. Miller, but you don't have the power to separate yourself from the consequences of your actions. History has already judged you and found you lacking. Your legacy isn't strength. It's the sound of children crying for parents they were taken from, and no amount of interruptions will drown that out. The chamber erupted. Miller sat frozen, his usual confidence gone, his expression pale and stunned. Even his lawyers were speechless. As the chairman attempted to restore order, it was clear the moment had left a lasting impact. When asked if he wished to respond, Miller's shaky reply, I stand by the policies. We were protecting America, rang hollow. The man once known for his dominance in political exchanges was, for the first time, at a loss. Crockett's final words, Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time. Mr. Miller's silence speaks for itself, sealed the moment. Applause filled the room, measured at first, then spreading throughout. Even some Republicans avoided eye contact with Miller. What Crockett accomplished in 3 minutes resonated far beyond the committee room. Within hours, footage of the exchange spread across social media. News outlets replayed it, and commentators across the spectrum acknowledged that they had witnessed something remarkable. If you were forced to confront the documented evidence of the suffering caused to thousands of children, your carefully built narrative would collapse instantly. The room remained utterly silent. Miller's complexion shifted from red to pale. His legal team behind him appeared frozen, unsure whether to intervene or remain quiet. Crockett continued steadily, pulling out one document after another, laying them on the table as she spoke. Let's review what these documents actually state, Mr. Miller, since you seem unwilling to let me question you properly. She held up a memo from the Deputy Secretary of Health and Human Services. This one confirms that children as young as 8 months old were separated from their parents 8 months. Mr. Miller, another report from your own Customs and Border Protection shows there was no formal system in place to reunite these families. None. And this email chain, which includes your name, shows you dismissing concerns about the psychological harm. Writing, and I quote, the deterrent effect outweighs other considerations. She paused, looking up. Miller's grip tightened on the witness table, his knuckles white. He opened his mouth but said nothing. Other considerations, Crockett repeated quietly, her tone even but firm. Those so-called considerations were children, Mr. Miller, babies, toddlers, and young kids who will carry this trauma for life. And you knew it. You all knew it, and you did it anyway. The gallery reacted immediately. Some were in tears. Others nodded in agreement. Chairman Jordan was calling for order, but Crockett continued. "Here's what truly matters, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice steady yet commanding. "You can interrupt me, talk over me, or try to minimize me, but I am still here. Those children remain traumatized. Those families are still broken. And you are still responsible." Then came her final statement, the one that would be replayed millions of times across social media. "You may have had the power to separate families, Mr. Miller," she said, leaning forward, "but you don't have the power to separate yourself from the consequences of your actions. Interrupting me 6 times doesn't change the fact that history has already judged you. Your legacy isn't strength, it's the sound of children crying for their parents. And no amount of talking will ever drown that out." The room erupted. Miller's face turned pale as he sat in stunned silence. His mouth opened several times, but no words came. For perhaps the first time in his public career, Stephen Miller was speechless. His lawyers whispered to him, but he didn't respond, his gaze fixed on Crockett with disbelief, perhaps even fear. The gallery broke into applause as reporters frantically typed updates. The key-span camera zoomed in on Miller's expression, capturing every moment of his silence. Chairman Jordan struck his gavel for order, but the noise overwhelmed him. Even some Republicans looked unsettled. Crockett, meanwhile, remained composed, her hands folded neatly. She had used only 3 of her 5 minutes, but she had made her point. When order was restored, Jordan asked quietly, "Mr. Miller, would you like to respond?" Miller leaned toward the microphone, his voice hoarse and unsteady. I stand by the Trump administration's policies. We were protecting America." It sounded weak. Everyone in the room knew it. The man known for confidence and control had just been dismantled by a freshman Congresswoman from Texas. Crockett's closing line was calm but decisive. "Mr. Chairman, I yield back the remainder of my time." Mr. Miller's silence speaks louder than any defense he could offer. As she yielded back, something remarkable occurred. Members of the gallery began a slow, deliberate applause that spread throughout the room. Even some Republicans avoided eye contact with Miller. He sat frozen, his notes scattered and forgotten. His legal team looked equally stunned. They had prepared for every argument and line of attack, but not for this. Crockett had turned Miller's own tactics against him, using his interruptions as proof of his arrogance and closing with a statement that left no room for rebuttal. The silence that followed was heavy. Miller's hand shook slightly as he reached for his water, nearly spilling it. The man who once confidently defended controversial policies now appeared lost. Representative Ted Lieu, next in line for questioning, leaned forward. "Mr. Chairman, I think Ms. Crockett said everything that needs to be said. I yield my time." One by one, other Democratic members did the same, an unprecedented show of unity. They knew nothing more needed to be added. Miller sat through each moment, his composure slipping further with every yielded turn. By the time Jordan finally called a recess, Miller looked like a boxer barely standing after too many blows. As the room emptied, he stayed seated, staring at the table. His advisors tried to reassure him, but he barely reacted. In just 3 minutes, Jasmine Crockett had achieved what years of media scrutiny and protests had not. She stripped away the facade Miller had built and exposed the human cost behind his policies. Within minutes, clips of the exchange were circulating online. "Crockett destroys Miller" began trending worldwide. Her statement, "Your legacy isn't strength, Mr. Miller. It's the sound of children crying for parents they were torn away from," spread across platforms, turning into headlines, memes, and protest signs. Within an hour, news outlets interrupted programming to replay the clip. Commentators across the political spectrum called it extraordinary. On CNN, Anderson Cooper played the full exchange, saying, "In 2 decades of covering politics, I've never seen anything like this." Even conservative voices struggled to defend Miller. Tucker Carlson admitted, Miller walked into a trap. He should have let her ask the questions. Lavra Ingraham tried to redirect to current border issues but was repeatedly drawn back to the viral moment. On MSNBC, Joy Reid summarized it bluntly. "This is what happens when you try to bulldoze a prepared woman with facts." Crockett didn't just challenge Miller, she exposed the weakness behind his aggression. The political response was swift. Former President Barack Obama tweeted, "Representative Jasmine Crockett showed us what grace under pressure looks like. She reminded us that the victims of cruel policies will not be forgotten." President Biden's statement echoed that sentiment. Today's hearing revealed the deep wounds caused by family separation. Representative Crockett's words remind us why such cruelty must never be repeated. Donald Trump, on the other hand, posted on Truth Social, defending Miller, "Stephen Miller was ambushed by a radical Democrat who doesn't understand border security. He fought for America while she grandstanded for cameras." Yet even Trump's reaction lacked his usual intensity. Notably, many Republicans stayed silent. Senator Ted Cruz said only, "I didn't watch the hearing." Marco Rubio urged everyone to focus on solutions. Their restraint spoke volumes. Crockett's office was flooded with calls, messages, and support. Her social media following grew by hundreds of thousands in a single day. She received invitations from major networks but accepted only one, with PBS NewsHour, where she discussed immigration policy without sensationalism. "This isn't about me versus Stephen Miller," she told the interviewer. "It's about accountability for policies that hurt thousands of children. The American people deserve honesty, not theatrics." Meanwhile, Miller's team went into damage control, releasing a statement claiming he had been ambushed and that Crockett politicized national security. But it sounded defensive. Miller canceled his planned TV appearances and remained quiet. Behind the scenes, the consequences were even deeper. Several Republicans on the Judiciary Committee privately voiced frustration over Miller's performance, with one congressman admitting to Politico that he had embarrassed them all, saying, "You can't just interrupt your way through oversight hearings." Many felt that Representative Crockett had completely outmaneuvered him, turning the exchange to her advantage. The immigration advocacy community quickly seized the moment, rallying around Crockett's sharp retort, which was soon emblazoned on T-shirts, protest signs, and social media hashtags that trended for days. Families who had been separated at the border began sharing their stories again, inspired by seeing someone in power hold Miller publicly accountable. Legal experts also examined the evidence Crockett presented, noting that the documents, many of which had previously received little attention, clearly indicated the administration was aware of the psychological harm their policies would inflict, yet chose to continue regardless. Several former prosecutors suggested that these materials could be pivotal in ongoing lawsuits against the government. Harvard constitutional law professor Lawrence Tribe called Crockett's approach brilliant from a legal standpoint, explaining that she not only exposed Miller's conduct but also ensured that critical evidence became part of the congressional record, effectively confirming its authenticity through his inability to refute it. The cultural impact of the exchange extended beyond politics, serving as a lesson in power, interruption, and respect. Women's rights organizations cited the moment as a textbook example of how interruption can be used as a form of dominance and how women can push back effectively. The hashtag Let Her Speak began trending, as women from various professions shared personal experiences of being interrupted or talked over at work. Corporate diversity trainers even used the video as a teaching tool. Dr. Kenji Yoshino, director of the Center for Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at NYU Law, remarked that Miller's behavior exemplified how microaggressions can escalate into more overt forms of disrespect, noting that Crockett's composed response should be required viewing for anyone studying power dynamics in professional environments. In the week following the hearing, the broader political fallout became evident. Miller's influence within conservative circles diminished sharply, as several Republican candidates quietly withdrew their requests for his endorsement. His once lucrative speaking engagements evaporated amid the controversy. Meanwhile, the family separation policy, previously fading from public discourse, was thrust back into national focus. The Biden administration announced renewed efforts to reunite separated families, and Congress began discussing legislation to provide compensation and prevent similar policies from ever being implemented again. Crockett used her growing platform strategically, avoiding triumphalism. Instead, she focused on legislative reform, introducing the Family Protection Act, which would ban family separation at the border except in verified cases of abuse or trafficking. The bill drew bipartisan support, including several Republican co-sponsors eager to distance themselves from the policy's negative legacy. Crockett also began mentoring young women entering politics, particularly women of color. Speaking at a leadership conference in Houston, she reflected, "What happened in that hearing wasn't just about me and Stephen Miller. It was about every woman who's ever been told to be quiet or to wait her turn. You have the right to be heard, respected, and to hold power accountable." The exchange also reignited scrutiny of the Trump administration's immigration legacy. Journalists pursued new Freedom of Information Act requests inspired by Crockett's revelations, and several whistleblowers came forward with additional details on how the family separation policy had been crafted and enforced. 3 months later, a report from the Department of Homeland Security's Inspector General validated much of what Crockett had revealed, confirming that officials, including Miller, had been repeatedly warned of the psychological damage such policies would cause, but continued regardless. Viewing the trauma as a deterrent, attempting to rehabilitate his image, Miller published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, accusing Crockett of political grandstanding and claiming she cared more about viral moments than border security. However, the piece failed to gain traction, drawing criticism for its defensive tone and lack of engagement with the core evidence Crockett had introduced. A year later, the hearing's significance endured. It was featured in an award-winning documentary on U.S. immigration policy, which included interviews with Crockett and affected families. Miller declined to participate. The film reignited national attention on the lasting trauma endured by separated families. Political scientists later analyzed the incident as an example of preparation and moral clarity triumphing over hostility. Dr. Jennifer Lawless of the University of Virginia observed that Crockett didn't attempt to overpower Miller's aggression but instead used it to her advantage, delivering a moral argument that transcended partisan politics. The ripple effects of that exchange persisted across Congress' subsequent hearings, saw witnesses attempting Miller's interruption tactics, only to be swiftly curtailed by committee members who referenced the now famous Crockett-Miller confrontation as a reminder of what professionalism and restraint should look like. The phrase, "We're not doing Miller interruptions here," soon became a familiar expression among committee chairs whenever witnesses grew too aggressive. Women across different industries began sharing their own Crockett moments, recalling instances where they turned interruptions and disrespect into demonstrations of skill and self-assurance. The term "pulling a Crockett" entered the political lexicon, meaning to use an opponent's hostility against them with composure and accuracy. For Stephen Miller, however, the reputational damage was lasting. While a small group of loyal supporters insisted he had been ambushed, his influence in mainstream conservative politics declined sharply. His public appearances were reduced to minor events and friendly podcasts. A far cry from his earlier days shaping national policy from the White House. The man once at the center of political power now found himself on the margins, remembered primarily for being rendered silent by a freshman Congresswoman he had tried to overtalk. Legal consequences from the hearing continued to unfold as several lawsuits filed by separated families referenced the transcripts, particularly Crockett's presentation of evidence indicating that the administration knew its policies would cause deep psychological harm. In a landmark case, a federal judge even cited Crockett's statements in ruling that the government owed damages to affected families, writing, as Representative Crockett powerfully demonstrated, the cruelty was not incidental, it was intentional. 2 years after the hearing, Crockett released a best-selling book titled Uninterrupted, Speaking Truth to Power in America, with the chapter about the Miller exchange becoming the most widely discussed. She reflected, that moment in the hearing wasn't planned. I had prepared my questions and documents, but when Miller interrupted me for the 6th time, something became clear. His interruptions weren't just personal, they symbolized how his policies had interrupted the lives of thousands. Children interrupted from their childhoods, parents from their protective roles, and entire communities by fear and trauma. When I finally spoke, it wasn't only for myself, it was for every child who cried alone in detention, every parent separated from their child, and every person told their pain didn't matter. Miller thought he could silence me with interruptions, but they became proof of his guilt, not only in that hearing but in history. Men like Miller never understand. You can interrupt our words but not our truth. You can talk over us but not silence justice. You can dominate the conversation, but never the reckoning that follows cruelty. Crockett's book tour reignited public attention around immigration and made her one of the Democratic Party's most recognized rising figures. When asked about her political ambitions, she consistently replied, I'm focused on doing the job the people of Texas sent me to do. If I do that well, the future will take care of itself. Meanwhile, the Crockett-Miller exchange became symbolic of a new approach to political accountability, one that relied on calmness, preparation, and moral clarity rather than aggression. Political consultants began advising clients to study the hearing, with one Republican strategist noting, the old playbook of interrupting and dominating doesn't work when your opponent knows how to turn it against you. Crockett showed that preparation and composure win over bluster every time. In journalism schools, the exchange was analyzed as an example of how political theater can produce genuine accountability. Columbia journalism professor Emily Bell noted that Crockett didn't simply create a viral moment, she used Miller's own behavior to reveal the cruelty of his policies, demonstrating political communication that transcended partisanship. For separated families, the psychological impact was profound. Many said they finally felt validated after years of silence. Seeing him unable to respond to the truth about what he did, it was healing, said Maria Santos, who was separated from her 3-year-old son for 8 months. For so long it felt like no one cared. Representative Crockett showed that someone was listening, someone remembered, and someone was willing to fight for us. Support groups began incorporating clips from the hearing into therapy and healing programs. Psychologists working with traumatized families found that witnessing accountability helped patients process their pain. It's not justice in the legal sense, explained Dr. Louise Zaz, but recognition of cruelty by someone in power carries immense therapeutic value. 3 years after the hearing, its influence remained visible in American politics. Crockett's statement, "Your legacy isn't strength, it's the sound of children crying for parents they were torn away from," became one of the most quoted lines in modern political history. It appeared on monuments, academic works, and in speeches by leaders across the political spectrum seeking to distance themselves from the cruelty of family separation. Crockett herself became one of the most sought-after voices in her party, passing multiple bills on immigration reform and child welfare, often citing separated families as her inspiration. "Every bill I write, every speech I give, I think about those children," she said in an interview. "They deserve better, and so do we." As for Miller, his efforts to restore his image through opinion pieces and sympathetic interviews failed. The image of him speechless at the witness table became the defining symbol of his decline, often cited as the moment his political relevance ended. The broader message for American democracy was clear: preparation, truth, and integrity still have the power to overcome aggression and cruelty. In an era dominated by performance and noise, Jasmine Crockett proved that substance, composure, and moral conviction can still shift the course of history. Her dismantling of Miller's 6 interruptions into his ultimate downfall became more than a viral moment. It evolved into a masterclass on confronting power with discipline and truth. Crockett's effectiveness lay not only in her words, but in her control, patience, and ability to transform disrespect into evidence of moral weakness. She didn't shout or retaliate. Instead, she allowed Miller's behavior to condemn itself before delivering a calm, pointed response linking his personal disrespect to the suffering caused by his policies. Her 7 pivotal statements questioning documented trauma, referencing specific memos, demanding respect for her time, citing HHS documents, grounding herself as a civil rights attorney, patiently enduring his 6th interruption, and finally, delivering the unforgettable line about children's cries collectively, reshaped the moment for anyone facing their own, Stephen. Miller, someone who mistakes dominance for strength and volume for truth. Crockett's example remains a guide. Don't mirror their aggression. Let their actions reveal their character, and respond with composed, evidence-based truth. The influence of that exchange continues to ripple outward. Young professionals, legal scholars, and political scientists all study it as a turning point in how power can be challenged effectively. Most importantly, families affected by separation finally heard someone in power affirm what they'd always known: that what was done to them was deliberate, cruel, and wrong. Jasmine Crockett didn't just defeat Miller in a viral clash. She gave a voice to the silenced, dignity to the dehumanized, and hope to the forgotten. In an age where spectacle often overshadows truth, her victory reminded the nation that preparation, integrity, and courage still matter. Bullies, no matter how loud, can be exposed when faced with calm, factual truth. As America continues to reckon with the legacy of family separation and pursue a fairer system, the lesson from that hearing remains enduring. Those who interrupt to avoid accountability will eventually be interrupted by truth itself. If you found this exploration of one of the most pivotal political moments in recent history insightful, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Your support helps us continue bringing deep, meaningful analysis of the events shaping our democracy. Share this video with anyone who values real accountability, and tell us in the comments which other defining political moments you'd like us to examine. Remember, truth and justice only thrive when we speak up for them. The question is, will we use our voices as powerfully as Jasmine Crockett did on that unforgettable day? The choice and the responsibility are ours. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for our next video, where we continue exploring the moments that matter in American politics. Stay informed, stay engaged, and never let anyone interrupt your truth.